You're listening to Cover Your Assets, a podcast that discusses the timely and significant legal issues faced by employers. Kathleen Jennings is an attorney who has over 30 years of experience in advising employers as to their legal responsibilities and has written extensively about employment law in her popular Cover Your Assets blog. If your business has employees, you cannot afford not to have your assets covered.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cover Your Assets, the Labor and Employment Law Podcast. And as mentioned in the intro, I am here with resident expert / attorney, Kathleen Jennings. And she happens to be a Bills fan and my sister.
I was waiting for you to add the part where I was your sister. I was a little concerned that you were not going to reveal that important fact. So I'm glad that you did, because you are, in fact, my favorite brother.
Why, thank you. And you are, in fact, my sister.
Thank you.
But anyhow, today...
And yes, I am a Bills fan. I am happy to say that I have joined the Bills Mafia, and so I am a faithful Bills fan.
And to fans of other teams across the country, we mean no ill will. So maybe we shouldn't.
Exactly.
Maybe we shouldn't even talk about the Bills anymore because they lost today on the day that we're recording this. But anyhow, I predict this year they will either be in the Super Bowl or they will not. That's what I predict.
That's a bold prediction, Tom. So I guess at the end of the season, we'll see how that comes out. Yeah. Well done. That's really going out on a limb with that one.
Well, today's topic is, for those of you who have been waiting patiently through our opening banter or the monologue. Well, it's a duologue, right? A monologue would be one person. But anyhow,
exactly.
Today's topic is, this show's going to go to pot. In fact, I think people should get a scorecard and see how many marijuana puns that we can inject into the podcast. We are going to talk about marijuana laws. And I thought a good starting point would be maybe a definition of the difference between legalized use of marijuana, decriminalization of marijuana, and the difference between federal and state marijuana laws. That's a lot to stick on your attorney plate, but all of them very timely topics. So let's start there.
Well, I'll try to wade through the weeds to give you some answers to those questions. But what we're talking about in terms of workplace is we're talking about laws. There are laws that protect off-duty marijuana use. These are state laws. There are laws that allow medical marijuana to be used. There are some states where recreational marijuana is completely legal. I believe you live in one of those states, dear brother. I do not. And there are states where medical marijuana is all that you can have legally. And I do live in a state that has a medical marijuana law. And the main difference between state and federal law is that under federal law, as we sit right now, all marijuana use is illegal. Yeah. Marijuana is still classified as an illegal drug. So there are no federal laws that will protect your marijuana use, but there are state laws that will protect your marijuana use unless the federal government really wanted to try to say that federal law preempts state law, which is a whole other issue. I don't see that happening under this administration, but it is something that can be asserted by the federal government.
And to let people know, I'm in New York State, and my sister is in Georgia. And to the best of my knowledge, there's no joint proposition for those two states. Is that correct?
That is correct. I would give you a green light for that particular assertion. Right. Yes.
And it's interesting because my wife, she works for a federal contractor. And so because they are a federal contractor, even though the business itself is located in the state of New York, which has decriminalized or made recreational marijuana use legal, and there's all kinds of different nuances that we don't necessarily need to get into. The federal law does supersede the state law in that respect. But yes, I think we can agree that at least currently it's still not legal in a federal sense. So even though a state can decriminalize it, there's still some tenuous ground out there.
There are, and it really depends on which political party is in power. And as I said before, the current administration is not likely to try to preempt any state laws that protect marijuana use because that's just not on their agenda. So I would say that what people need to focus on at this point are the state laws. And employers in particular need to be aware of state laws that govern the protection of off-duty marijuana use, and that means marijuana use that is not consumed during work hours. And then also some of the nuances of medical marijuana and how that intersects with the Americans with Disabilities Act.
So, and I've noticed you've been very careful in using the term off-duty marijuana use, which is an important distinction, because no different than alcohol, where alcohol is legal to purchase and consume for those of a certain age. I think it's probably 21 nationwide, even though it's still governed by state laws. There are rules and regulations that employers can have with regard to consuming alcohol during work hours. So not an illegal activity consuming alcohol, but I believe that could be a terminable offense. And we've touched on this a little bit, so I'm not going to beat it a dead horse, so to speak, or revisit a topic that we've already talked about. But, alcoholism as a medical situation, that's a discussion for another day. But marijuana as a medical drug, or whatever you want to call it, it is a drug, right?
Well, medical marijuana is produced under state law, and there are state licensing laws that govern the production and distribution of what they call it's low THC oil. At least in Georgia, that's what they're looking to produce. And in other states, it may be different, but it's basically a THC oil that people can use for various medical conditions.
So, really, I guess that's where things can get a little bit cloudy, because in terms of drug testing, you're testing for the presence of THC. So you don't know. So if someone purchased non-medical marijuana, consumed that in their off hours, even in copious quantities, I would imagine that the employer would be in a difficult position to really do anything about it if there is deemed a medical use. So I guess that leads to my next question. At what recourse does an employee have if they suspect an employee of overindulging in marijuana, whether it be medical marijuana, to the point where it impacts their job? And going back to the off-duty use, let's face it. If I'm going to work in 2 hours and I get drunk before I come in, I'm still under the influence of alcohol, even though I've consumed it off-duty. So how does that work with marijuana? If off-duty marijuana use is technically considered, because alcohol is a little different in that you can test for level of toxicity. I don't know if you can do that with marijuana.
Well, with marijuana, the biggest challenge for employers is that you really can't. There's no accepted test to show when the marijuana was ingested, because THC can stay in the body for, I think, up to 2 or 3 weeks. And so if somebody tests positive for THC on a drug test, that gives no indication of whether that person ingested that THC an hour before they came to work or a week ago at a party on the weekend. And I can give you an example of how this is it creates a problem for an employer, because I had a case where a fella was working in a factory, and a number of employees claimed that they saw him smoking weed on his lunch break. And then sometime during the shift, he put his arm in a piece of machinery that he had no business putting his arm in. and really that anyone in their right mind would not put their arm in, and was injured pretty seriously. And OSHA came in and issued a citation. And so one of our defenses to the citation was that this was employee misconduct because this fellow was under the influence of marijuana. And he was drug tested when he went to the hospital for the injury. And we even had an expert who would testify that the level of THC in his system indicated that his use of it was fairly close to the time of the injury. But the OSHA judge in that case did not accept the expert's opinion and said it was not reliable because there's no reliable way of really determining when somebody ingested the THC. And so she didn't allow that evidence at the hearing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough situation because now, the title of our podcast, Cover Your Assets, I mean, this really is, we're talking some serious dollars and cents here in that, yes, a workman's comp claim, you got a guy that's working with heavy machinery and they're stoned. What do you do? And in this case, people saw him smoking marijuana on break, but I've worked with people that just take gummies. So I don't know. I mean, they've told me that they took the gummies. I haven't necessarily seen them take gummies, but even if they were taking marijuana gummies, how would I know that they're not just eating gummy bears for that matter? So this is becoming, I think it's going to become a real problem for employers. But in the case that you just mentioned, I mean, I think even though the judge in your particular case may have ruled against it, wouldn't you think that it would be beneficial for employers to automatically drug test after an accident? I mean, or is that kind of standard practice anyway?
Most do. And as an aside, sometimes the hospitals won't do the drug test because they're concerned that it may disqualify the employee from workers' comp benefits, and the hospital wants to get paid. But that's a whole other issue.
Wow.
But yes, it's
that is crazy. I mean, that is absolutely crazy.
Fairly routine for employers to have, if they have any drug testing policy at all, there is usually post-accident drug testing as well as drug testing at the beginning of employment of applicants. And what I'm hearing from some of my clients now is they are still drug testing, but they are basically ignoring any positive THC results because in this job market, it disqualifies too many applicants. If everyone who has a positive THC level in a pre-employment drug test is not hired.
Yeah, and I've heard cases like that where people have tested positive for THC, and even back before the decriminalization in this state, and they were still offered the job for whatever reason. And I think for a long time, maybe marijuana use has not been as stigmatized as it was. But to me, it becomes a real problem because, as I said, I know that I've had coworkers that have said that they've ingested marijuana during the course of the workday, and they work with kids. I mean, this is a very serious situation, and obviously, you don't want your bus driver, your school bus driver, you don't want your city bus driver, you don't want your limo driver, or any of those people under the influence of marijuana. So I don't know. This is definitely a tough situation, and I would guess that when you had the gentleman who stuck his hand in the machinery, if he had a prescription for marijuana, there really wouldn't have been anything you could do anyway because it was supposed to be in his system.
So, Tom, I think what employers need to focus on is employee behavior, because any kind of behavior that could cause an unsafe situation, either because of they're working with children, as you pointed out, or working around machinery in which they could be injured or driving. It's important to observe the behavior of employees. And if you see anything that causes, or if supervisors see anything that cause them concern that perhaps the employee is not in the best state of mind or could possibly be under the influence of something, then that behavior that they observe should be documented and they should conduct more investigation. But they should definitely have concrete proof of why they want to investigate the behavior, not just because they think the person is a little strange or they don't like them, but because maybe for alcohol, they smell like alcohol, um, have bloodshot eyes, maybe they're slurring their speech, anything like that that could cause concern that this employee is presenting a possible danger to him or herself or others.
So the question I have then, can you legally discriminate against somebody that has a medical marijuana prescription if there's a type of job where it could potentially be impacted by marijuana use, or does that fall under ADA? And again, with it being illegal federally, how does that isn't that kind of a slippery slope?
Well, it makes it a more difficult analysis because the medical marijuana use in and of itself would not be protected under federal law. However, if this person has an underlying disability, then they would be protected against discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So if the employee is asking to be allowed to use medical marijuana as a reasonable accommodation so that they can perform the essential functions of the job, then at that point, the employer has to do an analysis of whether the use of the medical marijuana, and this goes to any kind of medication. If somebody is taking serious pain pills or narcotics that could affect their behavior, then the employer has to make a determination as to whether the use of that medication, including THC, makes it so that the employee is not able to perform the essential functions of the job.
Well, I guess then that leads to a question, and I think as usual, you bring up great points. So, in a situation like let's say now I'll use personal experience because that's what I do. I had a back injury, and I was taking a medication called Flexeril, and with the Flexeril, I was told I couldn't drive. It was in the doctor's recommendation. They said, "Well, you're taking this, you can't drive." So told my employer I had to take time off of work while I was nursing this back injury, and I was on this particular medication. Is there a situation where with medical marijuana, wouldn't that come with some kind of reasonable, like, don't do this warning on it? Don't drive a school bus under the influence of your medical marijuana?
I think it would probably depend upon the dose, when they take it, what the physician is giving as any kind of possible precautions or side effects. So there's a lot we don't know. So I think it's like a lot of situations involving disability, you have to make an individualized assessment and figure out at the end of the day whether, I think certainly the Flexeril, if somebody is in a driving position and they're taking Flexeril, you don't want them driving. So you want to know about that. So like things we've talked about before, it's probably better for employees to feel comfortable to let you know upfront what medications they're taking, including THC, so that then the employer and the employee can figure out together, does this limit anything that the employee is able to do at work, or are there things that the employee should not do because perhaps it would be unsafe?
I think that's a great point. In reality, if you know somebody's using medical marijuana, you probably, and if you have a factory or different types of positions, you may want to just put them in a position where they aren't using machinery that could cause some very serious physical harm. And that's protecting the company, and it's protecting the individual as well.
Well, and again, it depends upon if the employee is taking a small amount at night to help them sleep and really feel no effects in the morning. That's a very different situation from the employee who has to ingest it. And I don't know amounts. I don't know a lot about medical marijuana. I don't take medical marijuana. But it's the kind of situation where you just are going to have to work with the employee and perhaps the employee's physician to determine, does the dose and the timing of the doses cause any limitations in the employee's ability to do the work that they're supposed to be doing. And then, for the recreational, that's, we have, I think, especially as you pointed out, there used to be a stigma about marijuana use. And there's still, I think, among some of the, shall I say, older generation.
Hey, we are part of that older generation.
We are part, actually it's sort of like not the super older generation, because you had the folks that were the hippies, and, so they were all doing God knows what. And, they came out fine. But then you have, there's still a part of our country that's pretty conservative. And so they frown upon not only marijuana, but also alcohol and other things like that. So there are still some areas and some businesses who do not look approvingly at employees using marijuana, even recreationally. They're not comfortable with it. And in states where recreational marijuana use is protected, those companies are going to have to be careful about whether they take action against those folks.
And it's interesting because now I don't smoke marijuana. I mean, I did when I was younger. I don't anymore. It made me paranoid. I'll just be honest. I'm in a state where it's legal, so I don't have to pretend I do or don't anymore. But I remember I went to a concert with Thom Jr., who was a guest on one of our earlier shows. One of our highest rated in the archives, by the way, number 2.
He was a fantastic guest. We need to get him back.
We need to get him back. So I'm at this Dave Matthews Band concert, and I'm walking around, and there's all these people handing me joints and trying to get me to smoke it. And I looked at him and I said, "Geez, why are they handing me these joints? I don't smoke weed." And he's like, "Dad, you're wearing a Grateful Dead shirt." So, and I tell that story in a way to kind of emphasize the fact that, on the surface you could look at people and they look like they're pot smokers. I mean, I have a long beard. I wear a lot of tie-dye. I mean, everybody assumes that I smoke weed. I don't. But you can't assume that either. That and maybe sometimes it is the people that seem least likely to be indulging in recreational marijuana to an excess at work. And I guess if it's at work, it's not necessarily recreational, but you're still going to kind of keep an eye out for those things. So I wonder, and maybe you can answer this question, or maybe you can't. Maybe we'll just ponder it together. Would it be helpful for an employer, let's say, if they do have an employee that appears to be using marijuana during the course of the workday, they have some of the typical symptoms. Again, it's not, the smell thing is not what it used to be, because there's ways to ingest marijuana where you don't stink. I know, I work with people that do it. But you can sort of see the eyes and the affect. Is that something that maybe an employer needs to document? But even then, let's say I got a coworker who's just kind of got it out for me and says, "Oh, Jennings is showing up stoned every day," and I can tell by his bloodshot eyes. And my eyes are bloodshot every day because I have really dry eyes. So I mean, this is again.
Yeah, or people have allergies. I mean, I have allergies, and that irritates my eyes. People with contact lenses are going to have eye issues. So I think, it's hard, especially with the marijuana. And again, not being able to have some kind of test that will prove or disprove that the person is under the influence at that moment. Really, the only thing that's completely reliable is if you have a witness who sees the person ingesting the marijuana in whatever form of their choice and during work hours, and reports that to somebody in management. It's the same thing as you're not supposed to be drinking on the job.
Right.
But with alcohol, you can have somebody take a breathalyzer, and that's going to be a pretty reliable way of showing whether the person is under the influence at that moment or not. You just don't have that with marijuana.
Yeah, and I'm I mean, I guess the only thing that you can do in this situation, since you can't necessarily prove that alcohol or marijuana use is happening at the workplace, is if it is negatively impacting the employee's performance, and you can't prove that it is negatively impacting the employee's performance, you still need to document the poor performance and then eventually figure out a way to get them out of there if they're not doing their job. I mean, this may sound kind of weird to say it, but if an employee is able to use marijuana and while they're working and they're functioning and they're still doing a good job, maybe that's just not a problem you have to worry about. But ultimately, it comes down to if an employee's not doing a good job and you suspect they're using marijuana, then figure out a way to document the things that they're failing at in terms of their position.
I would even take it a step further, Thom, and say if an employee is not doing a good job for whatever reason, you document the performance. You don't necessarily need to worry about the cause. If you want to, probably at some point have a sit down with the employee and say, look, these are the issues that I'm observing. Is there anything that we can do to help you do better, perform better? And maybe sometimes in those situations, the employee may say, well, as a matter of fact, I have this health condition and I'm taking this medication, or I'm using this THC and it really seems to kind of slow me down. And, then at that point, you deal with the issue. But I wouldn't try to speculate as to why an employee is performing poorly. But you do want to document the observations of how the employee is performing poorly and give the employee feedback and an opportunity to do better. That's the other thing. You don't want to do this. The point of documenting is not just to keep a record of the bad things an employee has done. You also want to use it as an opportunity to coach the employee to see if they can do better, because replacing people is hard. And so if you've got someone, and you really have an opportunity to see if you can turn them around and turn them into a better employee. And if you give them every opportunity to improve and they don't do it, then if they are terminated, it's nobody's fault but their own.
Yeah, I mean, and you're putting them on notice. And for the record, I when you say that you use documentation to coach, that I've never experienced that. They're always using it to get rid of somebody. That's what I call the big lie. Whenever I have like these big employee meetings, and they'll say, well, it's performance review time, and they're not meant to be negative. They're meant to help you improve your performance. It's like, no, it's meant to be justification to give us a lower raise than we really want. But that's the cynical side of me.
Wow. Okay. Well,
there's these heads bobbing out there like, yeah, I can relate to that for sure. But now, in the perfect world. In a perfect world. And I will say, there is actually a reliable test for the level of toxicity of marijuana. You play Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, and you look at the level of enjoyment. And if they're really just sitting back and getting into it, they're high.
Well, and probably there may be the ingestion of snack foods as well.
Yeah.
If they're making a lot of trips to the break room to get snacks.
Oh goodness! Just
leave a
supply. Just leave a supply of ramen noodles and cereal in your employee kitchen, and put a camera in there, and you can monitor who's consuming the most of that, and then you'll know.
Exactly. Yep.
There you go. But that's all in jest, folks. Listen, if you're out there listening and you're using medical marijuana for a problem, God bless you. I don't judge you one bit. There's a lot of people that use it, and it helps them a lot. And if you're using it recreationally because it helps you get through a weekend or an evening, hey, that's fine too. We don't judge on that. This is really a topic, again, that we're trying to address because it's an important one. As we said at the beginning, it can cause some problems for employers and for employees, for that matter. Again, if there's an employer that's intolerant of marijuana use, and they are out there, then employees have to kind of beware as well. And I would suggest, since we are really gearing this podcast towards employers, you have to be very careful not to be too intolerant, because marijuana use it's a reality. People use it.
It is, and especially among the young folk, as we say. Although I actually know a good number of older folk that use it as well. So I think it can be anybody. It can be people that surprise you.
Yeah.
And it used to be much more secret, less secret now, I believe. And just in terms of judging, I did want to point out that I will judge folks a little bit for eating the ramen noodles.
Yeah. Too many ramen noodles.
Ramen noodles are not healthy.
Yeah.
Not the cheap ramen noodles, not healthy.
Yeah. Is there anything other than the cheap ramen noodles? I mean, is there like a whole wheat special vitamin enhanced ramen noodle? I don't think that exists. Maybe that's a business we need to get into.
No, there's good ramen noodles out there.
Really? No.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know about that. Okay. Well, if you say so.
Like bespoke ramen noodles, absolutely.
Are we trying to get them as a sponsor? Because I'm happy with that. We'll do that. We didn't get Paycor, so.
Yeah, no, we don't need a ramen noodle sponsor, but who knows? Maybe somebody sitting there listening to our podcast, having a little smoke and ingesting their ramen noodles will want to sponsor us.
Absolutely. Because, they think, gosh, these guys aren't making fun of our ramen noodle consumption, which we are, but that's okay. We can all laugh together. We're not laughing at you. We're laughing with you. And we're actually making more fun of the ramen noodles than we are of the people that consume them.
Yes, exactly.
All right. Well, with that, we've come to that moment of the show that the tears roll down our eyes. It's wrap up time. We got to roll this baby up, lick it, put it together, blaze it up, and finish her up. So what's your last? What's your takeaways? And I mean, when I say takeaways, I mean like Bogarts. What's your Bogarts this week? I was
gonna say don't Bogart that joint, but you took my line away from me. So I would say, as usual, be aware of your state laws with regard to marijuana use that is legal versus illegal. And be aware of your state laws with regard to whether there are protections for employees who use marijuana off duty and not at work. You can have rules that prohibit employees from using any kind of substances, legal substances like alcohol or marijuana while they are working. But as we talked about, it's much harder to pinpoint when someone used marijuana versus when someone used alcohol.
And again, if there seems to be a performance issue, whether or not you think it's related to marijuana, just handle it like you would any other performance issue. Document, and document some more. And do a little coaching. Man, if one of you employees...
I was going to say, do a little coaching. maybe not in Tom's case, because maybe they determined it wasn't going to help anyway.
Maybe I've just been a horrible employee my entire employment life, that I've never actually gotten coached. But anytime I've been coached, it's because, you're doing something bad.
Maybe you're not coachable.
I'm not coach. Oh my God. I've heard that one before.
Did you play team sports? Actually, for our listeners, I did coach you when you were on a soccer team.
Well, we coached together. We
coached together.
We were co-coaches.
Co-coaches.
That was our first. How did
that end up?
We won the championship.
Okay.
You don't want me to relate the story of how we got into an argument about sportsmanship. That's a tale for another podcast.
Okay. We'll save that. We'll tease that. Yeah.
We'll tease that one. It'll come up at some point.
Yeah. So not only are you coachable, but you have been a coach.
I've been a coach many times. Yes.
Yes. So there you have it. So
yes. And I've never given my the team members, I've never gone up to them and said, we need to have a teachable moment here. Hold on a minute. Let me write this down. Let me sign the fact that you didn't take that shot when the goalie was away from the goal. You know what I'm saying? It's not coaching. berating.
Okay.
All right. I guess we'll wrap up with that. We already had our takeaways. And again, folks, we really appreciate you listening to the podcast. In all seriousness, the numbers have gone up. And strangely, well, in a good way, everything's been in the United States for a change. We had these weird pockets of listenership in Morocco and Nigeria. And I'm just sitting there looking at the numbers going, what is going on? And thankfully, it looks like we're starting to garner a little bit of an audience out there. We do appreciate all of you. I feel that all of you are not, you're all wonderful. I'm not going to call you coachable, but we do appreciate you listening. But I will ask you, not coach you, to please consider doing a review, sharing this podcast with your coworkers, with your friends, anybody that would find it relevant, or anybody for that matter who just loves a good podcast. I mean, who don't like that when you're running, driving, all those kinds of things that you can have a podcast.
And you can learn something.
You can learn something. Learn something new. Even if you're not in HR, you can eventually go into HR. I've learned a lot about HR, and I'm not in HR. I'm the anti-HR. I'm the employee that the HR people don't want. Let's just be honest.
Which means maybe you have a future in HR.
You know, yeah, like the guys that were criminals that what if they all go into security? They go, I can break in your building, so now I'll be here at security. All right, on that note, thanking you for my resident expert, sister, and best podcast co-host on the planet. I will say thanks for listening. And remember, folks, don't forget to cover your assets. Oh, wait. Before that, contact information, Kathleen.
I was afraid my contact information was going to go up in smoke. So you can shoot me an email at kjj@wimlaw.com.
And if you want to contact me about a podcast, I'm at Thom, Thom, at coroniamediagroup.com. That's in the show notes. And until next time, folks, always remember, cover your assets.